Hey everybody, we are going to finish up this chapter today and we're going to talk a little bit more about respiration, and we're also going to talk about fermentation, which is what happens when you don't have oxygen around for this parts of Krebs cycle and electron transport chain to happen after glycolysis. So there are two types of fermentation. The first one we're going to look at is called alcoholic fermentation. And so glycolysis is still going to happen. You're still going to break the glucose into the pyruvates, but this is an incomplete oxidation. So we said before that Krebs cycle and electron transport chain happen after glycolysis to further oxidate pyruvate and get more energy out of it. So alcoholic fermentation is an incomplete oxidation because there's still energy left in the alcohol products. But this process does not require oxygen, and so it is able to produce ATP when there is no oxygen available for the cell to use. So here you guys are looking at sort of a breakdown of this process. So it's not as complex as what we've been talking about so far. So here you have your glucose where you start. You are still going to go through glycolysis, so you'll still produce your 2 ATP, and you will make 2 NADHs and 2 pyruvates. What's going to happen now is you're going to release a carbon dioxide, and we have a new molecule here, and this is just an intermediate. The acetaldehyde is not going to stay around. Instead, it's going to get converted to ethanol, and in the process of getting converted to ethanol, it takes these 2 NADHs and it converts them back to NAD+. And once it's converted back to NAD+, then glucose can get broken down through glycolysis yet again. So in order for glycolysis to continue, you need to have a steady supply of NAD+. So if you did not do this final step down here of making the ethanol, then these NADHs would stay here, and then glycolysis would stop as well. So this last part is really important because it regenerates the NAD+, so that glycolysis can continue in the cell. Now there is another type of fermentation, pretty similar you'll see, and this is lactic acid fermentation. Again, uses only glycolysis. Again, an incomplete oxidation, so you still have energy left in that lactic acid. Also does not require oxygen, and it will still produce ATP when oxygen is not available. So you can see it looks pretty similar. The process is a little bit different. You start with your glucose, you go through glycolysis, you produce your 2 ATP, you produce your 2 NADHs, and your 2 pyruvates. All right, but from here though, you are going to go, and this pyruvate is going to get converted to a new compound, and so here you have your lactate. And again, this last part is really important, that you convert the pyruvate to lactate, and again, you are regenerating this NAD+, so the process of glycolysis can continue even though there is no oxygen, so you're still getting some energy out of this process. You're not getting as much energy as you would if oxygen was available in this case for cellular respiration, but still some energy, so the cell still has a source of ATP. And so lactic acid fermentation, this is actually done by human muscle cells under oxygen debt. So if you're running really fast, let's say you're sprinting, or you're using up oxygen really quickly. So like any type of anaerobic means without oxygen, any type of anaerobic exercise, your muscle cells are actually going to go through lactic acid fermentation to get energy. And so that's maybe sometimes why you get sore, stiff muscles, if you get that kind of lactic acid buildup. So summary for just fermentation here. It's a way of using up the NADH so that glycolysis can still run, and it also provides ATP to a cell even when there is no oxygen. So it's really important for that. So this is just a diagram just to kind of break down what could happen to glucose once it enters a cell. So here you have glucose entering the cell, so now it's within the cytoplasm. Glycolysis is going to occur. You're going to make the pyruvates. With no oxygen available, that pyruvate is going to go through fermentation. In a human cell, it would go through lactic acid. If we were talking about, let's say, yeast, it would go through alcoholic, and then you would get ethanol as the end product there. However, if oxygen is available, then that pyruvate is going to get sent into the mitochondria. It's going to get picked up to form acetyl coenzyme A and pulled into that Krebs cycle, and then the electron carriers from there will then go on to the electron transport chain to produce more energy than is available than just going through fermentation. So I've talked a little bit about aerobic versus anaerobic. Aerobic is going to be any type of respiration with oxygen, and then anaerobic would be respiration without oxygen. And so even when you talk about like exercising, aerobic exercises tend to be things like long distance running, where you're not running as fast, and so breathing is a little bit easier. Anaerobic then would be things like powerlifting or like sprinting, things that sort of take the wind out of your sails pretty quick. And then aerobic respiration is when you see all three steps of cellular respiration that we've talked about so far. So you have glycolysis followed by Krebs cycle, and then ending with electron transport, and that is when the oxygen is needed, is that electron transport chain. And then anaerobic is going to be when you have glycolysis only, and then you're going to follow it up with one of the types of fermentation. So what goes through fermentation, what goes through cellular respiration? You can be strictly one or strictly the other, or you can flip back and forth. So with like somebody that's strict, or an organism that's strict, it means you can only do respiration one way. Facultative means that you can actually switch respiration types depending on whether or not oxygen is available. So yeast is one example that goes through alcoholic fermentation, and I already mentioned that human muscle cells can go through lactic acid fermentation when they need to, but then when oxygen is available, they will go through regular cellular respiration, the three steps that we've been discussing. Okay, so we have this question then, if you can do either or, what's the difference in energy? All right, so if you can, if you're a yeast and you can go through alcoholic fermentation, or you can go through regular cellular respiration, what kind of energy are you going to get from each of these? So with anaerobic or some type of fermentation, you only get the 2 ATPs per glucose from glycolysis. However, with cellular respiration, you get all of the energy from glycolysis, Krebs, and electron transport. So you're going to be generating more ATP per glucose molecule. So with glycolysis, you're directly producing 2 ATPs, but you're also making 2 NADHs. And then with Krebs cycle, you're directly producing 2 ATPs again. However, you're also making 8 NADHs for every 1 glucose and 2 FADH2 molecules. And then those 2 types of electron carriers will get sent to the crista of the mitochondria, and they are going to go through the electron transport chain and produce even more ATP. So you get about 3 ATP for every NADH and about 2 ATP for every FADH2. So then when you sum all of this up, you are going to get 10 NADHs made with the breakdown of 1 molecule of glucose total for Krebs cycle and for glycolysis. So 10 times 3 is going to be about 30 ATPs. For every molecule of glucose, you're going to make 2 FADH2s. So 2 times 2, you'll get another 4 ATPs. You produce 2 ATPs, or you have a net gain of 2 ATPs after glycolysis, and then you have a net gain of 2 ATPs after every Krebs cycle. So when you add it all up, maximum you're making 38 ATPs per glucose. However, you are using some energy to move those NADHs from glycolysis into the mitochondria. So although 38 is possible, it tends to be closer to about 36 ATPs made for every glucose, because you're spending a little bit of energy sort of shuttling those NADH molecules into the mitochondria. All right, so I know that was a lot. Make sure you rewind and take notes on that. You need to know the energy totals for this whole process, all right? But we're also talking, so now why is respiration important? We already said it converts food to ATP. And remember, when we talk about food, it's not like a pizza is turning into ATP, but once your body breaks down your lunch and you are able to absorb those nutrients, it's those nutrients then that can go through respiration, get converted to ATP. And it also provides materials for use in other cellular pathways. What I wanted to show you guys here is that I got cut off just a little bit, but we've been talking a lot about sugars and how you get your sugars and then, or carbohydrates in general. Those carbohydrates are going to get broken down Glucose will go through glycolysis. At the end of that, you'll have pyruvate, which will help form acetyl coenzyme A, get pulled into the Krebs cycle. Then you have oxidative phosphorylation. You're producing all of this energy. But keep in mind, though, that we have all of these other different types of molecules that we've talked about this year. So lipids can get broken down into glycerol and their fatty acids, and then they can actually be further broken down and again pulled into a cycle like this and used to make energy for the cell. Same thing over here with proteins being broken down into amino acids. They can enter this and they can be used as energy as well. So other reasons that respiration is important, alcohol and baking industries. So almost every society on earth has some type of fermented beverage or another. And so again, that's going through alcoholic fermentation. The baking industry, so we use yeast when we bake. It helps bread rise. So all those little bubbles that you see in dough, that is from fermentation. Just a quick question. This isn't your lecture question, but you guys are a bit young for this, but if you ever notice, alcohol content of wine is usually around 12 to 14%, and there is actually a scientific reason for that, and that is because alcohol is toxic and it will kill the yeast at high concentrations. So the yeast is really important for making those fermented beverages, such as wine, but at a certain point that alcohol content gets so high that then the yeast is going to die, and so that's why you have that average alcohol content. So your summary for chapter 9, you guys need to know the 3 main reactions of respiration and the required items for each. You need to understand the importance of respiration. This is not on the slide, but you also do need to understand this idea of oxidation and reduction and how it happens during this process. And now here is your lecture question. So since yeast can do both aerobic and anaerobic respiration, which one is better if given a choice? Which one is better for those yeast cells to go through? All right, guys. Thanks, and I will see you soon. Don't forget to submit the answer to your lecture question via the website. Thanks.